ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund and all those involved in bringing us together again to support Africa. No country has been spared from the pandemic. Low, middle and high-income countries have all suffered directly through the colossal health impacts and indirectly from the dramatic decline in domestic activity and international trade. For African countries in particular, the crisis has resulted in acute liquidity constraints. Expenditures have outpaced revenues, leading to rising deficits. As of June, Africa accounts for 7 of the 8 countries in debt distress and 12 of the 23 countries at high risk of debt distress. Without bold measures, Africa's liquidity challenge could spiral into a solvency crisis. Development parties have responded actively. The G20 debt service suspension initiative provided much needed relief that needs to be prolonged. But this initiative excludes many developing countries, including middle-income countries and several small island development states that have been hit hard by the crisis. I call on development partners to broaden the initiative's eligibility to include all highly indebted and vulnerable countries that have been adversely affected by the emergency, and also to seriously address the structural debt architecture problems. For their part, the IMF and multilateral development banks have been instrumental in addressing liquidity needs across the continent. But going forward, far more resources will be needed to support the durable recovery. Bilateral official debt relief captures only about a third of Africa's debt exposure. Yet the past decade has witnessed an increase in the commercial debt of African countries, and the comprehensive solution to today's liquidity challenges must include the private debt. Moreover, debt relief must not endanger future access to capital markets. I urge developed countries to support the Liquidity and Sustainability Facility, a special purpose vehicle which aims to channel concessional investment financing to emerging markets. Since the beginning, I've been advocating for the new issuance of special drawing rights as an additional source of liquidity. The unprecedented nature of this pandemic requires allocations much greater than were made to meet the 2009 financial crisis. I maintain my call for at least $500 billion in additional special drawing rights, as well as the voluntary education of idle SDRs from developed to vulnerable countries. It is also vital to plug the serious leaks that divert vast amounts of funding from where it is needed most. Combined with tax evasion, illicit capital flight from Africa is estimated at $88 billion, equivalent to 3.7% of Africa's gross domestic product, and almost the equivalent of official development assistance and foreign direct investment combined. Bolstering transparency and exchanging data will be crucial in tackling the enablers and vested interests that benefit from this criminal practice. It is also time to seriously question the role and the very key systems of tax havens. Pandemic recovery must also support the transition to a cleaner, more sustainable future. In that spirit, we urge development partners to prioritize green growth through debt for climate swaps, namely. This financing instrument has proved to be effective in achieving the dual objectives of debt restructuring and environmental conservation, particularly in small island developing states. Finally, partnerships will also be vital as work continues towards the COVID-19 vaccine treatments and therapies. A vaccine must be seen as a global public good, a people's vaccine, available and affordable for everyone in Africa and indeed everyone across the world. Excellencies, since the beginning of the crisis, African countries and the African Union have shown commendable leadership and unity in response to the pandemic. The international community must continue to show commitment to Africa's health and well-being. Let me reiterate the total solidarity of the United Nations with the people and governments of Africa at this pivotal moment for the continent and for the entire human family. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you so much. Let me now call on His Excellency Mr. Moussa Faki Mohamed of the Africa Union, Chairperson of the Africa Union. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this renewed opportunity to address you since the spring meetings. African countries, through a coordinated continental strategy, have shown singular resilience. But this resilience is marked by that of the pandemic taking its toll in our health, livelihoods, and economies. As we continue to respond to the pandemic and its socio-economic impacts, Africa is also working to ensure access to vaccines for at least 6% of our populations as soon as they become available on the market. We welcome and support Gavi's COVAX initiative, which aims to make available vaccines for up to 23% of Africa's population. In order to reach our targets and continue to implement our strategy, Africa needs to mobilize billions of dollars in additional financing. We're grateful for the $12 billion support from the World Bank to fast-track financing to countries for the purchase and deployment of COVID-19 vaccine. And here, the need for speed to ensure this pledge support reaches where it's needed remains as urgent as it was 5 months ago. Ladies and gentlemen, we can and must do more. A matter of priority now is the issuance of a special drawing rights to Africa. During the 2009 global financing crisis, the international community rightly threw out the rule book and increased special drawing rights from 21 billion to over $210 billion. Despite this dramatic increase, Africa received only 6%. We ask for increased SDRs and a reallocation from countries that do not need SDRs to those that do. With your support, special drawing rights can prove decisive in ensuring that the pandemic does not reverse Africa's development investments on the last 3 decades. In this regard, I want to thank the IMF and its leadership for the extraordinary efforts. Between April and August, it disbursed about $24 billion in concessional loans. On the issue of debt, Africa requests an extension on the moratorium until the end of 2021, plus the widening of the scope of action, which is very limited today. Mesdames et Messieurs, les ministres des Finances africains qui sont présents et qui sont aux prises aux difficultés quotidiennes vous expliqueront certainement avec plus de relief la situation et les attentes du continent. In closing, as I said in April, Africa asked for equity based on collective global action organized against a shared vulnerability against this truly exceptional global event. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for those very valuable remarks. We will now have 2 speakers representing the G7 and the G20. As everybody around this table knows, there has, of course, been quite a bit of engagement from the G7 and G20 regarding support for the continent. So I would like to take this opportunity to first invite Mr. Hamad Al-Bazai, Vice Minister of Finance for Saudi Arabia, and current G20 chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Jordif and Mr. Malibas, for the opening remarks. We very much welcome the great efforts by the World Bank and the IMF in helping countries in need during this unprecedented crisis. The Africa region faces many challenges, and here let me reaffirm that the Saudi G20 presidency is working closely with our relevant stakeholders to provide the practical solutions that are highly relevant for the region. On the debt overhang issue, the G20 has launched its historic debt suspension initiative, DSSI, to support low-income countries during this crisis. And I welcome the support for the extension from previous speakers. The DCSI brought together more than 30 official creditors to address the short-term liquidity needs in vulnerable countries by freeing up scarce resources to mitigate the human and economic impact of COVID-19. It has also helped in enhancing transparency of public debt. Here, the Saudi G20 presidency will continue communicating publicly the progress made in the DSSI implementation, and we welcome the World Bank efforts to publish detailed data on external public debt. We are closely working with all stakeholders to provide an extension of the DSSI. We should work together to help enhance the private sector participation, as noted in the remarks of some previous speakers, and the DSSI for the benefit of LICs. We are encouraged by the support provided to the DSSI eligible countries by the IMF, including through the CCRT and the support provided by World Bank through dispersing net positive flows over the same suspension period of the DSSI. We encourage both institutions to continue their efforts and support for LICs, including by providing the needed capacity development support, strengthening debt management capacity, and further enhancing governance and domestic revenue mobilizations. Beyond the crisis response, we need to promote lasting solutions to situations of debt overhang. We call on IMF and World Bank to prepare analysis of the external financing needs in low-income countries and develop a set of proposals to further increase in new inflows to financing to these countries. Specific attention should be given to catalyzing private sector investments inflows, including the promotion of political risk insurance and other tools to promote risk sharing. More than ever, strong coordination among development partners will be essential. Let me conclude by thanking the IMF and World Bank for providing great support for the African region. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Minister. Let me now invite Mr. Brent McIntosh, U.S. Undersecretary for International Affairs, to speak on behalf of the G7. Mr. McIntosh.
Great, thank you. We appreciate this opportunity to gather to discuss how African nations and the international community can work together to improve the prospects for a robust and sustained African recovery. Before I begin, I'd like to commend David Malpass and Kristalina Georgieva for their remarkable leadership during this pandemic. The United States and the G7 have strongly supported the recent surge in IMF emergency assistance to Africa and the front-loading of concessional resources from the World Bank and other multilateral development banks. The G7 is playing a leading role working with the G20 in arranging for debt service suspension to free up fiscal space that many African governments are using to support their populations as they manage the pandemic. Additional financing from the international financial institutions will be central to Africa's economic recovery over the medium term. Resources alone will not be enough. To be most effective, financing must support priority reforms to enable the region to restore growth and build up buffers to respond to future shocks. Another key component of Africa's recovery will be addressing unsustainable debt decisively and expeditiously to avoid a lost decade. This is a particular challenge in the current complex creditor landscape, a challenge that we must rise to meet together. Turning to debt issues.
Okay. So, do you mind assuming the leadership of the IT sector?
Let me first, high and growing debt burden finance measures to grants for developing countries. So our share of this debt is declining. In any event, G7 countries quickly implemented the suspension on our share through the end of 2020. The G7 supports the extension of DSSI into 2021, provide eligible countries with additional breathing space to respond to the crisis. As other speakers have said, we need more robust private creditor participation. We also need full and transparent participation from all G20 creditors, especially China, the region's largest bilateral lender. That will be critical to ensuring that African countries are able to realize the maximum potential benefits from the initiative. That transparency should continue to be a major focus of the initiative. The initiative has helped to create a fuller picture of the universe of debt outstanding to low-income countries, which should promote informed credit decisions and help reduce the frequency and severity of debt crises. Finally, let me elaborate on the strong cooperation among around a common framework for debt restructuring for those African countries with more serious debt challenges. Expeditious debt restructurings will be important for allowing those countries to access financing from the international financial institutions and the private sector. To that end, the G7 strongly supports the G20's efforts to develop and implement a common framework for case-by-case restructurings that are based on an IMF program and debt sustainability analysis, provide proper transparency, foster fair burden sharing, and have full participation of all relevant creditors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. We will now proceed to the roundtable. To kickstart the roundtable and host the first part of the roundtable, I would like to give the floor to President David Malpass. Over to you, Mr. Malpass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary McIntosh and other speakers. We're going to have the first speaker, and I don't have too many briefing notes, so I wonder if the moderator can help me with this. We're going to have a first speaker.
Yes. So we're going to have Mr. Malpass. The interventions in the following order. They will be Ms. Vera Davis de Souza, Minister of Finance of Angola, Mr. Roberto Gualtieri, Minister of Finance, Economy and Finance for Italy, Mr. Abdoulaye Biocane, Senior Minister for Planning and Development, Dubena, Ms. Utta Urpilainen, Commissioner, European Commission for International Cooperation and Development, Mr. Alamin Usman May, as Chairperson of the Africa Caucus, and then Mr. Wolfgang Schmidt of the State Secretary of Federal Ministry of Finance, Germany. I can introduce those if you wish, Mr. Malpass.
So we have a great group of speakers, and what I found common in the remarks that we've heard so far is the clear acknowledgement of the severity of the downturn, the acknowledgement of the need for new financial resources, and those are provided from the international community, but also very much from the private investment that will take place in Africa through the sound and attractive climate that can be developed in a resilient recovery. And there was also ample discussion of the importance of vaccines, the importance of the debt relief process that's underway, and I think a full recognition of the severity of the challenges that the region is facing in terms of health, education, and all of the social needs and the job creation needs that are so important to the region. So with that, yes, moderator, could you introduce Vera, our first speaker?
Yes, so Minister Vera Davis de Souza, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you very much, Director Selassie, distinguished Managing Director of IMF, Madame Kristalina Georgieva, distinguished President of World Bank, Mr. David Malpass, Honorable Excellencies, Secretary General of the United Nations, Chairperson of African Union Commission, G20 and G7 Chair, Honorable Minister. First of all, I thank you for the opportunity given to me to speak on behalf of the Republic of Angola on addressing the continued economic challenges presented by COVID-19. The coronavirus pandemic has evidenced some inefficiencies in the global economy and in the economic structure of many African countries. That due to a lack of diversification that make us particularly vulnerable to external shocks. So the pandemic has set challenges to economic activity, as many countries have been forced to implement several measures of confinement to reduce the spread of the virus. We understand that the entities who lent resources to the African countries were expecting the debt service to be made, as they surely had plans for those funds. However, no economic model could have foreseen the appearance of this disastrous pandemic, and because of that, we understand that unprecedented situations call for unprecedented measures. That being said, and despite the challenge brought by the pandemic, Angolan authorities remain totally committed to achieve economic stability and resiliency, as well controlling inflation, safeguarding financial stability, and keeping the momentum of recent economic reforms. We are still working to promote economic recovery and resiliency through adoption of active economic measures that, if you allow me, I can share with you some examples. First of all, we accelerating the restructuring of the government. We recently took the decision of reduce the number of ministries, passing from 2008 from 28 to 21, from 28 ministries to 21, and we are transforming government by making the service we provide more digital. We are also investing to boost growth, create jobs, and raise productivity through programs such as the Integrated Plan for Intervention in Municipalities, Oil and Gas Strategic Plan, and the Angola 2025 Energy Plan. We are also strengthening state investment in the national health system by building hospitals and increasing our testing capacity. We are addressing inequality and poverty and closing gender gaps with the help and support of World Bank, implementing an income transfer program, as well as more progressive tax system. And at this subject, we had the productive help of the technical assistance of IMF. We are also continuing the fiscal consolidation process and the diversification of our economy. The big issue of promoting debt sustainability and implementing proactive debt management measures. Of course, including the adherence to the debt service suspension initiative in order to open some fiscal space as well as negotiated with our main creditor. So we would like to see the expansion of the existing relief initiatives, and we thank all the multilateral and bilateral partners and emphasize our commitment to make our economies and health systems more resilient to shocks, maintaining that sustainable, improve the business environment, and with this create the conditions to attract foreign direct investment and promote economic diversification. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. The next speaker is Roberto Gualtieri, the Minister of Economy and Finance for Italy, and which is the incoming G20 presidency. Minister Gualtieri. Could you unmute your mic and go ahead, sir?
Okay. Can you hear me now? Thank you.
Very well. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, David. Dear Excellencies, I'm really pleased to be able to join you in this time of unprecedented crisis to discuss the impact of COVID-19 in Africa and what the international community as a whole could do to mobilize support to the economic recovery of the continent. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, while tackling the health emergency and economic impact in our country, Italy, both on its own and as you remember, has been at the forefront in sustaining efforts to translate our global interdependency into international solidarity. and the African continent has managed the pandemic relatively well, with rate of contagion that has been lower than that in advanced and emerging economies. However, the region has had to cope with much higher economic costs that now threaten to reverse the improvement in per capita income and reduction in poverty that the continent experienced during the last 15 years. Many countries in the continent have public debt burdens that will be difficult to sustain and absorb too many resources that could be devoted to better uses for inclusive policies and investment in human and physical capital. The international community is now engaged in dealing with the debt of low-income countries, many in Africa, and aims to ensure a suitable path to overcome the hurdles of the crisis. To be successful, the extension of the debt suspension initiative that we fully support needs to be embedded in a most comprehensive strategy that, starting from full transparency and participation of all creditors, may promote additional financing, transparent investments, and debt relief. Furthermore, we continue to encourage all international organizations to go further on their collective efforts in supporting countries, including through providing net positive flows of resources and technical expertise. We also support a special allocation of SDRs. On the bilateral side, we are committed to provide the necessary support. Let me now address another issue which is key for the future of Africa, that is climate. Africa has already been hit by climate change, despite contributing only marginally to the global CO2 emissions. The shift toward renewable energy generation constitutes a major opportunity to get things right from the start of its economic transformation. The continent does not need to go through the mistakes that advanced and emerging economies have made, in particular, building excessive reliance on non-renewable sources that have generated environmental disasters and potential stranded assets that hamper their economic prospects. As Italy prepares to take the leadership of the G20, it is our intention to work on all these different fronts. First, to ensure the debt initiatives under discussion proceed in the most useful and successful way. Second, to promote initiatives aimed to mobilize more resources, also through innovative financing mechanisms, such as blended and impact finance, in order to be able to seriously and responsibly involve private sector. Third, we will focus our thinking on how to make sure the mobilized resources will be used in the most efficient and effective way, aligned to and prioritized toward target areas with high impact on sustainable development. Fourth, we will strive to ensure that vaccines will be available for all. Finally, all these actions should be framed within a coordinated governance structure which fully recognizes country ownership and regional integration. In this context, we will follow up on the work of country platforms and support African Union bold initiative for an African continental free trade area. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Galtieri. Next speaker is Minister Chani, Senior Minister of Planning and Development for Benin, which I know we work with Benin on the trade challenges in the region. Cross-border trade is a very important part of the challenges facing Benin. Minister Chani.
Thank you, Mr. President. Really appreciate this opportunity. Managing Director, Excellencies, we all agree that we all live in unprecedented times. We should agree also that African governments face challenging problems. However, neither has a period called for multilateral solutions so much. And therefore, I would like to salute and thank the fund and the bank for the swift and timely response provided to our governments. Let me say a few words on the way we tackle the problem in our country here in Benin. We conducted recently a survey which shows that 37% of the households in the country were vulnerable to COVID-19. 40% of businesses were also vulnerable to the pandemic, and 38% of formal companies surveyed used technical unemployment to cope with the effects of the crisis, and 16% of the companies have to lay off their own employees. And to address all of this, we have to take some measures. The total amount of the measure, the resources we provide to various sectors could amount to 5% of GDP, including 2% to the health sector and 3% to the social and economic sectors. On the social side, this includes transfer to households. The objective of all these measures is to mitigate the adverse social economic impact of COVID-19 while creating the condition for the rapid recovery of the economy. Our vision here in our country was guided by our response to the pandemic also, and also with the simple idea that our development commitment must remain intact, including our commitment to continue reforms. I think most of the African governors will share that same comment with me. But the strong and sudden demand for resources, if not managed in the most efficient way, will likely undermine the conduct of development policies in countries. So in that context, I believe the fund and the banks should scale up their intervention in the countries. And so I particularly salute the recent decision taken by the fund board, and I would like to thank you, Madam Managing Director, for that decision, and I expect, of course, the bank to do the same. But the idea we share with some of our colleagues is that the fund and the bank need to inject more sizable and timely resources to countries, including additional debt relief to some of the countries that need debt relief and additional resources. This is the only comment I would like to make at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Chani. Next speaker is Jutta Urpilainen, the Commissioner, European Commission, the Commissioner of International Cooperation and Development. Jutta?
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for inviting me again to your annual meetings event. It is an honor to participate and discuss our strong partnership with Africa. When we spoke in April, we didn't know how long the pandemic would last. Today, the virus continues to spread across the world, and we continue to fight it. Same time, we maintain a long-term focus and tackle the socio-economic effects of the lockdown. Dear friends, in Africa, the crisis has pushed back development process of recent years in many countries. For the first time in 22 years, poverty is on the rise. The pandemic could push 39 million more people into poverty in sub-Saharan Africa. Still, I am optimistic. I know that Africa will experience new growth and that this will come sooner rather than later. But it demands us to stand together and pursue coordinated policies and responses, just like we have done. The African response has been supported by our Team Europe effort. We have, together with the member states and financial institutions, allocated nearly 8 billion euros to support Africa. Dear colleagues, we have still a lot of work ahead of us. I recognize 3 key strands. Firstly, we must focus the attention on the most vulnerable. Many countries will emerge from the crisis with more debt. The debt burden risks to fall down on the shoulders of the poorest populations and next generation. We have supported the G20 Paris Club's debt services suspension initiative. We have provided some breathing space to our partners with budget support. This amounts to 1.3 billion euros for Africa countries. Secondly, we must continue to boost multilateral cooperation to ensure a global recovery. Together with UN and the multilateral financial institutions, including our hosts, the fund and the bank. As I said in April, we need global partnerships now more than ever. Thirdly, we must already seek the long-term solutions and change. We should focus on Africa's youth, women, and the most vulnerable. As stated in our new strategy with Africa, we will build back better by embracing the green and the digital transformation together. This is what the European Green Deal is about, a plan for true recovery. And finally, we need to encourage private and public finance aligned with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. We will promote the sustainable finance agenda and bring this all together under the Global Recovery Initiative. This, my friends, is the big task of our times, and I believe we together are ready to take it on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next, Elamine Ousmane May, Chairman of the African Caucus, Minister of Economy and Planning of Cameroon. Minister.
Thank you so much, David, for giving me the floor. Excellencies, distinguished participants, all protocol duly observed. Let me start by commending IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva and World Bank President David Malpass for their outstanding leadership in this period of unprecedented disruptions caused by COVID-19. As you mentioned, David, this pandemic will push Africa into its first recession in 25 years. Consequently, more than 40 million people will fall back eventually into extreme poverty, and 5 to 10 years of hardly real progress will be wiped out. While recording a relatively limited damage on the health front, the continent is to face major difficulties on the economic, financing, and social ground. The road to recovery, this is what pundits are saying, will be long and difficult. Therefore, we need not to lose momentum. Let's continue to build on cooperation, collaboration, and solidarity in an innovative manner with very strong instruments. 3 key areas have caught my attention today I would like to share during this meeting. First, as concerned international public finance, debt service suspension initiative combined with fast, rapid credit facilities helped our country to face the pandemic. However, more concessional funding is needed, 100 billion annually. Credit enhancement instruments based on SDR are also much required. I want to say also that DSSI extension to 2021 and expansion to all vulnerable African countries is necessary. David, item 19 has done a great job with front loading, but we need item 19 supplement because we need to prepare ourselves to finance post-COVID-19 development projects. The second aspect of my intervention today is about private sector financing. We need to maintain access to capital. We need to maintain access to reduced cost of borrowing. This require a liquidity support and sustainability facility alongside a debt restructuring process, including debt relief for countries close to or in distress situation. The private sector should be part of short, medium, and long-term solutions. Third, last but not least, bold ambitions, deep diving policy and institutional reforms should lead to structural transformation of African economies. Investment in infrastructure, digital economy, green economy, human capital, promoting private sector and strengthening domestic resource mobilization are area of great concern to all of us. To end my statement, I would like to say that IMF and the World Bank, as it was the case after World War II, are key stakeholders on the recovery trajectory if we were to secure our journey towards achieving sustainable development goals in 2030. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Minister May. Next, Marouane El Abbassi, Central Bank Governor of Tunisia. Ministre, could you unmute your mic and go ahead?
Many thanks, Mr. Malpass, Minister and governors. I will switch to French. Tout d'abord, je tiens à vous remercier personnellement pour l'appui que vous êtes en train de faire pour la Tunisie, pour l'Afrique, et aussi notre amie, la directrice générale Kristalina, qui est aussi très attentive à tout ce qui se passe dans mon pays en particulier, mais surtout aussi dans ce qui se passe au niveau de notre continent africain. Comme vous le savez, l'Afrique est particulièrement touchée par la crise du Covid. C'est une crise sanitaire extrêmement importante avec des impacts économiques qui sont dévastateurs pour beaucoup de pays africains. On a vécu la première vague avec, je pense, en Tunisie, avec pas beaucoup d'ampleur sur le plan sanitaire, mais beaucoup sur le plan économique. On a perdu en second semestre moins de 20% donc, de notre valeur ajoutée et on pense qu'à la fin de l'année, on va être à des niveaux de croissance donc, qui vont être entre 6 et 8% donc, en termes négatifs. Ce que la Tunisie n'a jamais pratiquement vécu depuis son indépendance. Donc c'est une crise inédite et je crois savoir que beaucoup de pays africains sont dans la même situation. Cette crise qui est venue donc, après donc, d'autres crises, notamment en Tunisie, on a eu une révolution en 2011, mais beaucoup de problèmes sont survenus, notamment au niveau des attaques terroristes qui ont eu un impact très important sur l'économie du pays, notamment son tourisme. Mais aussi, ça c'est venu après donc, beaucoup de changements politiques qui ont été faits pendant ces 10 dernières années et donc qui ont fragilisé donc, l'économie du pays. Donc, cette crise sanitaire a exacerbé donc, ces difficultés. Donc, tous les pays africains aujourd'hui ont des problèmes importants en termes d'espace budgétaire. Et donc, la réponse à cette crise sanitaire a été financée en grande partie par la dette. Et donc, déjà, le fardeau était important en termes de dette, mais il va être beaucoup plus important pour cette année, mais certainement pour les années futures. Tout d'abord, je tiens à vous remercier, M. Malpass, à remercier Mme Kristalina et quasiment tous les autres bailleurs de fonds pour l'appui qu'ils ont fait pour mon pays et pour les pays africains. Mais vous comprenez aussi que ceci étant important, et ça s'est fait très rapidement, donc avec des moyens rapides, comme ce qui a été fait au niveau du Fonds monétaire international ou au niveau du Fonds monétaire arabe ou avec l'appui de l'Union européenne ou d'autres bailleurs de fonds importants. Mais vous comprenez aussi que ceci étant important ne va pas être suffisant. Et donc, ce qu'on voudrait voir des pays, des institutions internationales et donc en multilatéral ou bilatéral, peut-être un allègement de la dette qui a été fait pour les pays à faible revenu, mais pour les pays qui ne sont pas à faible revenu et qui sont donc des pays émergents, vous comprenez parfaitement qu'ils hésitent à solliciter l'allègement de la dette parce qu'ils peuvent être stigmatisés aussi par les instances de notation internationale et ils peuvent baisser en conséquence leurs notes. Donc, il faudrait peut-être qu'on arrive ensemble à mettre en place des arrangements permettant de gérer la question de la dette tout en évitant les conséquences ou ces conséquences fâcheuses. Donc, je pense que beaucoup de pays africains sont dans cette situation et c'est peut-être intéressant de trouver ensemble des moyens de pouvoir le gérer. Maintenant, en allant au-delà de la crise, je pense que ça a été évoqué par Madame la directrice générale du Fonds monétaire. Les moteurs classiques de la croissance sont engrenés. Ils arrivent à un essoufflement. On a besoin de réinventer les moteurs de croissance. Vous savez pertinemment que l'investissement est en panne et l'exportation, notamment pour les pays qui sont ouverts comme la Tunisie ou beaucoup d'autres pays africains, l'accès aux marchés internationaux est quasiment extrêmement difficile, notamment le marché européen pendant cette période de crise. Donc, je pense qu'il faut qu'on aille vers de nouveaux potentiels de leviers de croissance qui vont passer certainement par l'économie verte et le digital. En Tunisie, nous pensons qu'il y a un vrai momentum pour le digital et pour l'économie verte, et notamment pour tout ce qui est énergie renouvelable. On a demandé l'appui des institutions internationales. On est en train de faire beaucoup d'efforts pour changer complètement de cap pour aller vers tout ce qui est digital et faire en sorte qu'il y ait une transition aussi énergétique importante. Je crois que le continent africain s'apprête bien à ces investissements et il faudrait l'aider. Juste pour terminer, Monsieur le Président, l'Afrique a besoin donc de l'appui des pays développés qui sont engagés dans cette mouvance mondiale. Et je pense que la coopération doit être sur les technologies, sur l'innovation, mais certainement sur l'éducation. Parce que sans éducation, et je pense que tous les indicateurs d'éducation aujourd'hui dans nos pays sont en train de baisser énormément, et vous comprenez que beaucoup de notre élite est en train de partir donc dans les pays développés. On voit chaque jour des médecins, des ingénieurs, donc des pharmaciens partir en Europe et qui ont été formés dans nos universités. Et je pense qu'aujourd'hui, dans un cadre de logique d'équilibre global, il faudrait éventuellement réfléchir sur les moyens que cette éducation, ces gens formés, fassent partie de ce qu'on appelle un global public good et qu'il y ait une réflexion à ce niveau-là. Je pense, pour terminer, Monsieur le Président, les catégories les plus vulnérables vont être les plus touchées par cette pandémie. Et je pense qu'il serait très utile qu'on pense à une logique un peu plus au-delà de ce que peut faire chaque pays, peut-être globalement, pour que cette pandémie puisse être aussi supportée à travers des filets sociaux par les pays les plus développés pour qu'on puisse sortir de cette crise debout et qu'on puisse changer les modèles économiques auxquels on était habitué. Pour terminer, je pense que la question du changement climatique est une question fondamentale. On a vécu maintenant cette crise sanitaire, mais les aléas des changements climatiques sont beaucoup plus importants et je ne crois pas que nos pays africains sont prêts à les surmonter ensemble. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Governor El Albasi. We overlooked Managing Director. If you could take over, please, moderating the second part. And we overlooked Wolfgang Schmidt of Minister of State for Germany. So we could start from there and then the rest of the running order. Thank you, Managing Director.
Wolfgang, good friend and somebody who cares very deeply about Africa. To take the floor. I am going to also be asking all speakers to be tight so we can hear everybody who has requested the floor to speak. Wolfgang.
Kristalina, thank you very much, and also to David, and also for organizing this. I think it's pretty clear that we need this exchange, and already the speakers before me made clear why this kind of exchange is so important. We are facing a global crisis, so global cooperation is very much needed. I will follow your advice and make only three short points. The first one is I have great respect for our African colleagues and the way they have dealt with this unprecedented economic and health crisis so far, particularly bearing in mind that many of your countries already had very high debt levels before the outbreak of the pandemic, and now you have to face this challenge. So that is why Germany is ready, as mentioned by other speakers from the north, to extend the G20 and Paris Club and IMF and World Bank debt service suspension initiative beyond the year 2020. We are at the moment negotiating among us the possibilities and the option, but we are also calling within the G20 for the facilitation of an adequate framework that would enable any necessary debt restructuring afterwards. And obviously, and Kristalina will be pleased to hear that, Germany continues to support a general allocation of IMF special drawing rights. Second point is that beyond the financial assistance, it is worthwhile to continue our deliberations in the G20 together with our compact with Africa partner countries. It is especially worthwhile to hold discussions now, as reforms and better business conditions will foster economic recovery, growth, and jobs in the period after the crisis, which we hope will come soon. So the time to act is now, and in this spirit, we will hold a G20 Africa Advisory Group video conference on the 27th of October, and I'm very much looking forward. And my last point is that the only way to end the pandemic is by means of fair and equitable access to vaccines for all nations and people. So considerable efforts will be required to guarantee the supply of vaccines for less wealthy countries. And it is therefore that Germany will add up the contribution of the European Union of 400 million euro with an additional 100 million euro to the international COVAX initiative. It's time to join forces. Everybody in the global community in Africa and elsewhere will benefit from a truly global solution. So thanks again for organizing this, and let's look forward to next week and to see the results.
Thank you very much for—
Managing Director, I'm very sorry. For Senegal, it's going to be—
I saw it. Thank you. Thanks. And I just want to recognize Germany's leadership on multilateral response to what is a crisis that affects everybody. We can't get out of it one country at a time. We have to pull together. And indeed, next on the speakers list is Minister Abdoulaye Diallo of Senegal. Very keen to hear from you, Minister. You have the floor.
Oui, je vous remercie, Kristalina. Monsieur le Président de la Banque mondiale, je tenais d'abord à saluer l'engagement de la Banque et du Fonds qui ont apporté le soutien technique et financier depuis le début de la crise. Nous nous réjouissons aussi de la décision du Conseil d'administration du Fonds de la mise en place d'une deuxième tranche de 6 mois d'allègement des services de la dette des 28 pays dans le cadre du Fonds fiduciaire RPC, ainsi que le prolongement de l'augmentation des limites d'accès au financement d'urgence. Concernant l'initiative de suspension de la dette, nous nous réjouissons aussi et saluons le soutien de la Banque mondiale et du Fonds monétaire en un prolongement de l'initiative. Toutefois, une participation plus complète et transparente des créanciers bilatéraux non membres du Club de Paris est nécessaire. Aussi, les créanciers privés ont jusqu'ici été absents de l'initiative et je crois qu'il faudrait travailler dans ce sens. Dans ce contexte, nous nous réjouissons des annonces du G7 relatives à la mise en place éventuelle d'un cadre commun de traitement de la dette au-delà de l'initiative de suspension de la dette, conçue pour favoriser la participation des créanciers officiels bilatéraux et des créanciers privés. Concernant la dette, on a une demande importante concernant surtout les dettes Covid, parce qu'aujourd'hui, ce sont des dettes qui ont financé, disons donc, du fonctionnement et qui ont financé aussi des plans de riposte, donc qui n'ont pas contribué au financement. justement donc des investissements de développement. Et pour cela, effectivement, ils ont eu un impact particulièrement fort sur le stock de la dette. Et c'est pourquoi nous demandons effectivement qu'il y ait un traitement particulier quand même de cette dette-là, parce que dans tous les cas, elle sera à payer, nous le confirmons, mais nous souhaitons quand même qu'elle soit à la limite lissée dans le temps pour la rendre beaucoup plus supportable. Parce qu'à défaut de ça, avec les financements annoncés, nous nous rendons compte aussi que les pays quand même seraient à des niveaux d'endettement élevés, ce qui n'est pas souhaitable parce que ça va impacter sur la viabilité de leur dette. D'autant plus que le président Malpass l'a rappelé tout à l'heure, l'allègement de la dette n'a pas été suffisant justement pour répondre justement aux besoins budgétaires de ces pays-là. Il nous faut aujourd'hui aller dans les relances, les plans de relance doivent être financés et nous souhaitons effectivement quand même qu'il y ait des réponses importantes à ce niveau. Et c'est pourquoi les plans qui sont mis en place, notamment le Sénégal après le plan de résilience, donc pour faire face à la pandémie, on a effectivement mis en place un plan de relance aujourd'hui dans le cadre du PAP 2 au Sénégal, pour lesquels les projets prioritaires, ce sont ces projets qui sont surtout porteurs de grande croissance. Et effectivement, des financements à ce niveau sont attendus, bien évidemment, avec l'initiative de suspension de la dette, mais surtout, vraiment, le lissage quand même des dettes Covid aujourd'hui est une priorité importante pour nous, pour pouvoir contenir quand même tous ces besoins de financement. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. And it is indeed true. We need to think of also what is our injection of financial resources to bring growth and jobs, and how to balance the pressures to manage what we have spent yesterday with what we need to spend today and tomorrow. Very good intervention, Minister. Next on my list is another very good friend, Minister Ken Ofori-Atta of Ghana. Ken, you have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you. It's really an honor to be here with the chair of the AU, Kristalina, David, and Secretary General. I think really it sounds to me like we understand the enormity of the problem, and I guess there's a slip between the lip and the cup as to what really we ought to do to put this sort of under control. And I'd like to leave you with the picture of Picasso's Guernica in 1937, horrifying idea of the tragedy of war. And as I look forward to the coming years, it's almost like a lost decade for us. And that picture still did not stop the Second World War, but we are forewarned. And therefore the urgency, or the fierce urgency to react, I think is upon us. And we must really dig deep to solve this. What Africa seems to be asking for is some 2.5% of the 12 trillion odd that the OECD countries have found it necessary to do. And so I know we have the resources, we have the brain power, and it's now an issue of perseverance and a real care for our neighbors. It would be sad for us to be the ones who walked away from Omelas, like Esla Leguan's story. I think we can do it. I think that there just needs to be a certain sense of urgency that their real lives are the end of it. And honestly, the solution with regards to SDRs, where the US's position is, with regards to China, as to not participating in the DSSI, are things that we need to look each other in the eye and ask the fundamental question: what type of world do we want? And we know that we can solve it. So I leave you with that, and I pray that by the time we finish the meetings next week, we'll have put together a structure to truly resolve this in a synchronized and coordinated way. I truly thank you all for this opportunity. And the issue of financing, I remember the IDA 19, I pushed for 100 billion, and we know that we need more now. With regards to IMF, another $1 trillion to you will give Africa maybe another 30-odd billion. A G7, G20 guarantee scheme could help us tap into the 100 trillion of capital that is under management in the private sector. So there are solutions. We can do it, and let's really understand our own common humanity and bring this thing to a quick close so that Africa's recovery will bring prosperity for all of us. Thank you very much, Kristalina.
Thank you, Ken, for putting us on the high road. David and I come in the footsteps of our founders who did that still in the midst of a war, but had the foresight to build a better world. That is the task we face today. I'm very pleased to invite next Mr. Alain Leroy. He is President Macron's special envoy for Africa and somebody who has his heart in the continent. Alain.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much, Madame Kristalina Georgieva. I'm speaking here on behalf of France and speaking that Mr. President Macron was very keen to speak himself to this event, and he had a very hectic day today. He couldn't do it. He will send a message, of course, but I would like to be very short. Two main points that he has in mind. First, as you know, France and President Macron were very much at the initiative of the SSI together with our G20 colleagues, and we will continue to work with our G20 colleagues and with IMF and World Bank to full implementation of the DSSI and the next steps starting next week with the G20 finance ministers meeting. And the second point I wanted to make, because we are very late now, is that President Macron has decided to invite for a high-level conference in May next year to discuss a bit what was said by all interlocutors today, that DSSI is a first step, but there are so many issues that, like, we need to have a better view on long-term financing for Africa, both for the states, for the private sector, and to attract more private investment into Africa with de-risking, risk clearing. And for that, we would like a conference with, of course, IMF, World Bank, our African partners, and the main donors to Africa, including China and others, to ensure that we collectively agree on some principles for this long-term financing for Africa, in continuation of what we are doing today. So I will stop here, but just to mention these two main points, and we'll revert, of course, to you in the coming weeks about this planned conference. Thank you again for this initiative.
Thank you very much, Alain. I now have a wonderful person to introduce, Miss Chang. She is the new executive director from China for the World Bank, and somebody who has a very long and very effective engagement with the Bretton Woods institutions, especially, of course, the World Bank. I got to know her from her previous tour of duty in Washington, and I know how clear she is when she speaks on behalf of her country, one that has a lot of engagement on the continent. Ms. Chang.
Thank you very much, MP Kristalina, and dear President Marpas, and distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It's really great honor to address this very important event on behalf of the Chinese Minister of Finance, His Excellency Mr. Liu Kun, I would like to just briefly make 3 points. The first on that of African countries. Since the G20 reached the consensus on DSSI, China has been fully and actively implementing this initiative. China is ready to work with the international community to step up support for African countries, particularly for those who has been hardest hit by the coronavirus and under heavy financial stress, by such means as further extension of the SSI to help them overcome the current difficulties. China hopes that international community, especially the developed members and the multilateral financial institutions, should take more decisive actions on debt suspension and relief for Africa. Second, on international cooperation in response to COVID-19, China has been unswervingly joined hands with the international community to fight the pandemic and fully support the efforts of African countries. Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized at World Health Assembly on May 18th and reiterated at Extraordinary China-Africa Summit on solidarity against the COVID-19 on June 17 that China will continue to do whatever we can to support Africa's response to COVID-19. And we are actively honoring our commitments, continuing to help African countries by providing supplies, sending medical expert teams, and facilitating Africa procurement of medical supplies in China. My third point on the vaccine, I think this is a very important topic right now. At this moment, several COVID-19 vaccines developed at China in phase 3 critical trials. President Xi Jinping emphasized at the recent 2 international conferences on June 17 and September 24 that these vaccines will be available, will be made as a global public good and be provided to other developing countries on a priority basis when their development is completed and they are available for use. Yesterday, on October 8th, China and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, signed agreement officially joining the COVAX. This is a very important step China has taken to uphold the concept of the shared community of health for all and to honor its commitment to turn COVID-19 vaccines into a global public goods. So we will do that. Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the message and our best regards to Minister Liu Kun. Very important to bring that sense of global solidarity, and I appreciate you doing exactly that. I'm going to announce a short extension of this meeting because we now have 3 minutes left. We have 2 speakers that have been confirmed and 3 who would like to make very short interventions. This is a very important topic. It is a very important for the continent, for us to come together. So bear with us. We would make a 10 minutes extension. And next on my list is somebody from the private sector, Mr. Jose Vinas from the chairman of Standard Chartered Bank. Everybody talks about private capital for Africa. Give us some good news.
Thank you very much, Managing Director, and thank you very much to you and to President Malpass for the kind invitation to be here today. Is a real privilege. I'll be brief and I'll start with a number. $345 billion is what you estimate is the financing gap that Africa needs to fill in the next 3 years. And that gap can be filled and should be filled by a combination of action on debt service, debt relief on the one hand, but also new financing, which is critical to Africa's growth and development. So the question is, what is the role of the private sector in helping bring the money from where it's most abundant to where it's needed the most, that is in Africa? And in that regard, I'll make 3 brief points. The first one is that while private capital flows are critical to Africa, both in terms of the economic growth development and its social sustainability, unfortunately, traditional capital flows will most likely not get us there, given the current conjuncture and the risk-return incentives for the private sector. The second point is good news. Something can be done and should be done. And I think that should build on the cooperation between the private financial institutions with the IFIs. And I think that we can do more through innovative funding structures, blended and impact finance, in order to bring money to Africa. And the third, and related to this, is the focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. The good news is that there is a massive pool of global money which is searching for ESG-related investments. And this is most important to Africa. But the bad news is that Africa is missing from this equation in the way it should be. So the pandemic, I think, offers a real opportunity to bring more sustainable investment into Africa. But for that, we need 2 things. We need action on the part of the governments in order to define sustainable projects in a reasonable manner. And second, I think that banks, together with IFIs and those national governments, need to, and other financial institutions from the private sector, need to make sure that those projects are bankable and achieve an adequate risk-return relationship so that the money comes in. So in a nutshell, the message is key to have public-private sector cooperation, not only to address the debt problems, but also to provide the capital that Africa needs to grow in a sustained and sustainable manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose, and yes, very constructive intervention. Thank you. We have the chairman of the Africa Initiative for Governance, Mr. Ike Imokwede, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Georgieva, and thank you, Mr. Malpass, for inviting me to participate at this high-level event focused on my continent, Africa. Excellencies and other distinguished participants, in my contributions, I seek to add value by bringing perspectives from the private sector through the lens of an actively involved citizen in terms of contributing the citizens' quota to this terrible pandemic that has shocked and threatens the whole world. I think I should start from the fact that, and I've spoken about this, at length, health pandemics do more damage over the medium and long term in Africa than other regions of the world. From HIV/AIDS to malaria to Ebola, the regions of the world put these pandemics to bed, but 10, 20 other, 3 decades later, Africa still carries an unacceptable disease burden. Some think that global health pandemics may do more damage to our African economies actually than global financial crisis. I pray that COVID-19 becomes a distant memory for the world, but I also pray that for Africa, it does not remain a lingering burden. Africa did well in fast-tracking emergency responses to the medical challenges, but the time that we have gained may be wasted if we don't roll out sustainable measures to fill the financing gap and our long-term needs. I've done some back of the envelope, arithmetic, and the world is spending $2,000 per capita in terms of interventions to fight the COVID pandemic. In Nigeria, for instance, we are spending $35 per capita, and that just tells you how wide the gap is. The good news, however, is that in Africa's private sector, we are accounting for as much as 5% of the total spend.
Oui, donc c'est Alain. Comme moi, j'ai toujours rien reçu, j'ai aucune nouvelle, hein, et donc c'est moi qui suis intervenu en direct.
Where the IFI started with debt relief. We also need funding from Africans in the diaspora. We have set up in Nigeria the Nigeria Solidarity Support Fund, established for Nigeria by Nigerians in partnership with the Global Citizens Organization. It's an all-digital crowdsourcing philanthropic platform that is sustainable, transparent, and supports the vulnerable citizens of Nigeria. We targeted 50 million. We started a few weeks ago, and we are now 10%, of the way, which isn't bad for a start. I also want us to talk about the secondary effects of COVID-19. Not those that we speak to about the general norms in a medical sense, but let's talk about the extreme poor, the disabled, those with mental health challenges, and so on. These statistical extremes, unfortunately, in Africa actually account for hundreds of millions of people. As we roll out responses to the challenges of COVID-19, we must not forget these people, because if we do, inadvertently, we will allow COVID-19 to create a global underclass of extreme poor, underprivileged, disadvantaged citizens, mainly in Africa, who cannot access these mainstream solutions. The Africa response must be funded globally and locally relevant, supported by the public and private sector's partners in the business of saving lives. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. And these are very important points. We have a comprehensive crisis, and we have to approach it with a comprehensive response. I have three speakers who promised that they would be very succinct. And I do believe it would be for the benefit of the meeting to give them the floor. The first one is the Minister of Finance of a big African country, of Nigeria, Ms. Zainab Ahmed. Madam Minister.
Good afternoon. Madam Minister, Kristalina is not here. She's currently traveling, and she has asked me.
She was on my list.
Oh, yes. She has asked me, Aliu Ahmed, the permanent secretary, to sit in. Currently, she's traveling in country. So I would be brief, as you rightly said. So by saying that we thank both the MD, you, Kristalina, and the president of the World Bank, David Malpass, for putting this together and for your initial remarks, and to other speakers as well. A number of speakers have already indicated that a lot of African countries have managed the pandemic well, but the economic impact has been quite severe and dire. In this regard, I think we want to recognize the role of the bank, the IMF, for their very timely action and for being the very first to come to the table for Nigeria by coming up with a huge facility of $3.4 billion. I must say that IMF did this in spite of the fact that even before we finished navigating our own internal approval processes, the funds have been disbursed. So this is really a record in terms of their swiftness and their timeliness of the response. The other institutions, the bank and the other MDBs, are still lining up to do the same. So let me make 3 points. First, to also acknowledge and thank the institutions for coming up with 100 billion over 3 years. However, we think that given the scale of the problem, there is a need to expand the envelope. Second, we also support the call to extend DSSI to end in 2021 as against December this year, and include all vulnerable countries. I want to end by urging both the bank and the fund to please allow countries that have done their assessment on the DSSI, but found that on the balance, the cost versus the benefit is minimal, they should be allowed to stay away. Because the messaging we hear from the staff of the bank and the fund on the ground is that certain operations will not proceed if we all do not take advantage of the DSSI. And we think that this is not very helpful. I will leave it there. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have clarity on this, which is inquiring about participation for countries that that are eligible. Just shows good faith towards their own finances. It doesn't mean that is a prerequisite. So just to be clear on that. We have one of the envoys of the African Union, Tijani Thiam, next. And I know, Tijani, you can be very focused. So step in.
Thank you for managing expectations, Kristalina, and thank you for all you're doing with David. Thank you. Just towards divergence and vaccine. Divergence is probably the main risk for Africa today because the developed economies are doing very well given the massive support. So I salute the emerging consensus we have compared to 6 months ago. The 1.2 trillion, 1.3 trillion that David and you mentioned to 2023, the recognition that there is a need for a massive influx of resources. And I just want to follow on what José Vignal said, to say that we have new types of creditors in Africa, and we need to think innovatively around that to arrive to achieve solutions. And he mentioned ESG. I wrote an article in the FT on ESG in developing countries last year. That's a promising avenue. But let's just make sure we have a debt restructuring framework that encompasses the new creditors. That's really crucial. Otherwise, we're just going to plant the seeds of the next difficulties. And the other one is vaccine. But just to salute what is being done with COVAX to fund the vaccine and access to vaccine in Africa. But that's really vital. And I'll stop here. Thank you, Kristalina.
Completely agree. We need full participation, and we need to be thinking of if the burden of that is not bearable, we have to find a way to shrink it. Last on my list is Vera Songo, somebody else who I know can be very concise. So Vera.
Thank you very much, Kristalina. Thank you to yourself and David for inviting us to participate. I'm just going to build on the messaging of the SG and say that Africa has so far been resilient in this crisis, but we know that its resilience will not last for too long if we do not have, as you said, massive multilateral response to particularly next year. I think that the $1.3 trillion number that you throw out there is frightening. And if I were an African finance minister now, I am clearly not going to be sleeping at night. Three things that we can do, of course, to improve on that and ensure that there's some liquidity is, continue to recapitalize yourselves, the CCRT, to ensure that there is more credit, and thanks to the IMF for coming out very strongly on that. Of course, extending the DSSI, but I think there's been a lot of conversation around vulnerability today. Let me just give you an example. In Egypt, 3% of the population lives below the poverty line. 40% of the population is vulnerable. So today, that 40% falls into poverty. And I think that is why there is a call to say, let's not just extend the DSSI for the poor countries, but also for those vulnerable countries, because we're catching a huge bit of potential poverty. On debt restructuring, of course, working with the IMF to understand how it can work. I want to join my voice with Jose Vilnas and Tijen to say, we must find a way to bail in the private sector. I think so far there has been a regressive tax. The private sector cost of capital for Africa is extremely high. There is no way that Africa can get out of this crisis like that. That is why we're proposing a liquidity and sustainability facility, which maybe eventually gets a new Green Deal for Africa, but finances it at affordable cost so that Africa can at least afford those resources. I would stop there. Of course, with the new Green Deal, women are involved, technology is involved, and it brings in the two things that we believe will take Africa out of the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. Yes, we need to crowd in private capital, otherwise the numbers would be just too big to handle. Now, we have a very unexpected guest, and I believe that you will allow me to extend our meeting once again a bit. And the unexpected guest is President Macron. So could we have President Macron, please?
Golly?
We're playing it. It'll be shared in a second.
Dear Kristalina, dear David, dear Antonio, dear participants. Allow me first to thank the IMF and the World Bank for organizing this very important meeting. I'm convinced that mobilizing all institutions to provide the appropriate financing for Africa is a crucial issue in this time of crisis. Today, we are facing an unprecedented crisis with wide-ranging social, economic, and political consequences. Together, We initiated the necessary actions that enabled the most fragile members of the international community to get through the first phase of the crisis. And let me thank here Kristalina and David for their leadership and the swift mobilization of their institutions. The sizable financing swiftly released by the IMF and the World Bank played a major role, and also a first step. And as a sign of solidarity, we collectively decided the debt service suspension initiative supported by the G20 and the Paris Club in order to assist urgently the concerned countries in their fight against the COVID and its economic impact. I do hope in the coming weeks we will confirm this first initiative and we will go further. Overall, the support is unprecedented. In just a few months, 81 countries have received financial assistance from the IMF, and the World Bank has committed to mobilize $160 billion over 15 months to support developing countries. But this was just a first step in the support we owe to Africa, in the new partnership we want to create with Africa to the benefit of all. We need to continue to work together in a structural manner beyond the crisis to create a new paradigm to help prevent a losing decade of development progress in this continent. We need a bolder and broader strategy on new financing for development in Africa. Assistance from the international community to countries in need is still paramount. Yet what we need now is to bring the most vulnerable economies back on the path of robust and inclusive growth. We need to build back better, achieve the SDGs, and address the challenge of climate change, while avoiding new over-indebtedness cycles in Africa. Of course, the private sector has a key role to play, since public financing will not be enough to tackle the issues at stake. It is critical to deepen our partnerships with the private sector and to further leverage public financial instruments to strengthen the mobilization of private capital. With this in mind, and building on the exchanges today, I would like to hold a high-level international conference on financing African economies in France in May 2021. This conference, for me, is a critical target of the coming month. Today's discussions are an essential first step to pave the way to that meeting in May. In Paris, we would aim to define a new partnership approach to develop strong and sustainable financing flows for African economies in a spirit of mutual accountability. This will be the opportunity to mobilize financing solutions to harness the potential of African economies. It will help cover the financing needs of states, local private sector, and projects, with a view to unlocking private investment. One of the key components of this new approach will be to agree collectively on common rules of the road in terms of financing. Borrowers and creditors must work with the same rules and standards so as to ensure both dynamic growth and sustainable development, but also fair competition and sustainable levels of debt. In particular, keeping debt flows transparent and sustainable is essential to preserve fiscal resilience and ensure that growth and development are now jeopardized by new debt crises. To achieve this important goal, we will, of course, in the coming months, work hard with our African partners, the IMF and the World Bank, and the main donors to Africa, including, obviously, China. I'm deeply convinced that the work done today will contribute to the success of this new approach. And I am glad to invite you to continue that crucial discussion in May 2021, hopefully in person in Paris. With this in mind, I thank you again and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Well, I think President Macron did two things for us. He actually gave us pretty much the summary of our discussion. We talked about boosting productivity, fostering resilience to climate change. We talked about the role of the private sector, and we talked about that sustainability and how important it is everybody to participate. we do need to think of investment. Some of the ministers spoke about that is not bad when it is about investing in the future of growth. And we talked about the greatest strength of Africa, the young people of Africa, and how education and digitalization can unleash tremendous productivity for the continent. So I think with the help of President Macron, I can say our mobilization for Africa 3 with Africa 3 is going to be in May in Paris, and the agenda for this meeting is set. I would like to turn now to President Macron, to President Malpass, and ask President Malpass to put the final touch on what has been a very interesting and engaged meeting.
Thank you, Kristalina. And as you say, President Macron gave a full summary of the conference. And you were right that Vera Sanwe and Tchedjame Tayam were able to focus us on very, very specific issues. And so I think it was a grand finale for the conference that was really very clear. I'll make one short commercial for the World Bank. Next week, we will be putting out on Monday the international debt statistics. So we'll have even more information to build from. It's the first report that will have creditor information in it. And so it's going to allow people to see more about the debt situation. That will help. We have our recent report on poverty, which gives the severity of the challenge before us, and we're also moving as quickly as we can on the vaccine announcements through our board of directors, and so that's under discussion right now. And so it'll be a big week next week with the annual meetings, but this conference, I think, laid great groundwork for the magnitude of the challenge, and especially from President Macron and from Kristalina.
Yeah. Excellent. So
thank you, everyone.
To Abe, close the meeting.
Nothing further to add. Thank you all so much for participating and attending. Thank you so much.
Great meeting, great conference. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye, all.